Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the SDG tent. My name is Kirsty Graham, and I am Chair of Edelman Health, and I'm here speaking to you from New York. I'm delighted to be here today as we talk about the importance of trust. And 2020 has showed us all, I think, just how fundamental trust is. Whether you're in business, in politics, in healthcare, or even in our own personal relationships, trust is fundamental and it underpins everything. If you want to influence behavior, if you want to influence decision making, you absolutely have to be trusted. Edelman has been studying trust for 21 years, and we've been measuring trust in 4 institutions: in government, in media, in business, and in NGOs. And just 2 weeks ago, we released our spring update. I'm just going to give you a quick set of data points of what some of the key findings from our spring update revealed. First of all, there is now a very significant trust gap in terms of how people feel about those 4 institutions. We measure the informed population, and by that we mean people who tend to be higher educated and have higher incomes versus the mass population. For the first time in the 21 years that we have been studying trust, we see a record gap of 18 points between how those 2 groups of people feel they trust institutions. That's really important because it speaks to the inequality we see, and it speaks to these 2 different sets of realities as we experience life after our COVID pandemic. The second issue is that business is now the most trusted institution of all of them. And my employer is the most trusted societal leader, a fascinating finding. The third point is we have a raging infodemic, and we have record low scores for trust in the news media. We saw social media go to its lowest level ever, and we've seen the biggest drop in trust in traditional media. People literally don't know where to go for credible information. The fourth point is that business is seen as outperforming government in many key societal challenges. And these are issues like tackling the healthcare system, addressing climate change, and responding to COVID. But business is seen as outperforming government in terms of the competency to address these issues. And finally, public and private partnerships are seen as key to addressing the challenges we now face. All of this, I think, is a perfect backdrop for what we want to discuss this morning. And this year, at the Davos agenda, it was announced that 2021 was the year to rebuild trust, to refuel our economic development, and to strengthen partnership. So it does leave one thinking, has trust become SDG 18? How do we build back better? And to discuss this today, I'm joined by 2 world-class business leaders, Svein Holsether, and Svein is President and Chief Executive Officer of Yara, positions he's held since 2015. He is passionate about promoting the SDGs in the global business arena, and is a member of the Executive Committee and Chair of the Food and Nature Program for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Welcome, Svein. We're also joined by André Hofmann. André is the co-founder of Intent and vice chairman of Roche. And André is a businessman, an environmentalist, and a philanthropist, and a passionate advocate for business as a force for good. As well as his responsibilities at Roche, he also sits on the board of System IQ, the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and is a member of the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum. Welcome, André.
Thank you.
Can we begin by asking you both, as you look back on 2020, what have you learned about trust and purpose in the organizations that you lead? And I'm going to ask you first, Svein.
Well, to put it simple, trust builds and distrust destroys. And just imagine the cost of distrust and the control mechanisms, the verifications and the audits and everything that is necessary in order to compensate for the lack of trust. And when we put that in context now, what we're facing, we have 9 years left until 2030, and we know that at this point in time, it's too late with isolated actions. As companies or governments, it's a collective effort, and it's something that we need to do across the whole value chain. And then the first ingredient in getting that done is through long-lasting partnerships with trust. So there's a real urgency now to break the trust code, and that's a challenge that all of us as leaders need to face. Leaders need to lead now, and this behavioral shift is needed, and we need to move from maximizing our own profits to maximizing the value for society and the whole value chain, and moving away from keeping our cards close to the chest to sharing information and data. So without trust, we will not be able to solve even the minor problem. But with trust, there's a tremendous amount, really no limit to what we can achieve. And I think that's something that has become very clear in the year that we've been through now.
So you make some very good points there around the importance of thinking about society as a whole. And I like that point you made about the importance of sharing if we're really going to make any progress. André, reflections from you from 2020 and what you've thought about trust and purpose.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. To start with that, I must say I'm absolutely delighted that we're able to discuss that absolutely fascinating topic. Trust is not only something that is organizing international relationship or organizing relationship in humanity, it is also an absolutely essential condition to live a happy and fulfilled life. I can see a lot of people around me who are getting more and more frustrated at the fact that they feel that they cannot trust anybody, and we will not go back to a level of individual satisfaction if we cannot sort of reconstitute this trust around us. As you mentioned, I am vice president of the Roche group. I represent my family shareholder on the company. We are a board of 12 individuals, and we are responsible for 100,000 employees. It would be absolutely impossible to do that sort of task without a strong trust base between the participants. I need to be able to trust my neighbor, so that my neighbor can demonstrate that truth and what he holds as the truth is important to me as well. Implicitly, trust is an acceptation of your own limitation. You cannot trust somebody just by being dominant. You need to be on a par. There has to be a big level of humility in what you do. And I think that's the situation in the pandemic has demonstrated that more than ever. I find the finding of the Edelman barometer absolutely clear. If you cannot trust society, in other words, politicians, scientists, networks, companies, where do you go? And we need to reconstruct this. And the only way, in my view, to reconstruct trust is based on transparency and predictability. We have collectively not been able to communicate in a predictable manner about this pandemic for lots of good reasons. It's a new disease, it's a complex situation, but exposing your weakness in public has always been seen as a weakness, and I think that's probably wrong, because if you want to be trusted, you have to show your limitations as well. So this is a little bit of a rich pot of feelings, but I am really very grateful to the SDG 10 to have organized this session, because trust will be the stone on which we are going to be able to build better, not build back, because what as we were before was not really good, but build better. There is this obsession of short-term profit maximization of Svein just referred to, and this obsession of short-term profit maximization and promotes this syndrome of distrust. I cannot trust business because they're trying to leg me over. I cannot trust governments because the only thing they're looking for is to get re-elected. And as long as I don't realize that we're all in this together and that we can collectively make an agenda that brings us forward, it's going to be difficult to reconstruct this. So I would say that trust as a management tool is something that we have perhaps underplayed in the past. It's not just short-term profit maximization, net present value calculation, EPS growth, shareholder value, which should drive us. We should also make sure that we use trust with our customers and with our employees. I think that's fantastically important. And yes, it can be seen as a weakness, but I think it's a strength.
So you said so many things in there that I think was incredibly important around leadership, but also this point, and I think it's come through so much in 2020 around humility, vulnerability, empathy, and how important those qualities are now. I wanted to go back to the point you made around short-term versus long-term, because I think this is a fascinating issue, particularly in relation to the SDGs and business. You know, sometimes many companies seem hesitant to speak out on issues beyond what they believe materially impacts their business. How have you, in your roles, shaped short-term business goals to focus on long-term sustainability? And what advice would you give for those who are sort of starting out on this journey? André, do you want to go through?
So, there is also a very real limitation to this trust phenomenon during the COVID period. We've all gone working remotely, and that to a certain extent makes physicality less important, but also puts more emphasis onto how can we trust people. How can we make sure that our employees continue to produce the work we need to bring the company forward. And there are 2 points which are absolutely indispensable. One is this notion of values. We have defined our values within the company, and we want to make sure that the people who work and every decision they take at any level of the decision chain continue to live our value. We've defined them as courage, integrity, and passion, and we want people who work with us to be involved into these 3 dimensions. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are all united in trying to help the patient. And in a time of pandemic, that's even more important than before. We need to make sure that the work we do produces outcome which is going to be beneficial to the patient. That's our innovation strategy. That's our lifeline. That's what we do. And as long as you can get these 2 things very clearly established, the purpose and the values, I think you can start building a scenario which answers your question.
That is, I think, incredibly important and instructive for people who are trying to make this connection. Svein, in your world, how have you been able to make that transition in thinking?
Well, we have an advantage, I think, for both our organizations that we've been around for a long time. For us, 116 years, and that means that for us, it's never been about optimizing the next quarter. It's the long-term agenda that we work on, and then we break it down the other way. The long-term target, and then what does that mean for us in the short term? Wanted to build on something that André said when it comes to trust within the organization, because that reminds me of one of the big leadership challenges I had back in March of last year when the pandemic hit most of our business really hard, and what do we do then? And it's very tempting then to put in place massive reporting mechanisms and having large organizations working on getting data to the headquarters. But we decided otherwise and said, well, you know what? We trust you. We empower the whole organization. We have 3 priorities. Number 1, health and safety of our employees and contractors. Number 2, help the governments to reduce the spread of the virus. And 3, make sure our product gets out to the farmers. Other than that, you run the companies, you run the businesses, you're on the ground, you know what to do, and we empowered. And it was quite extraordinary to see the response from that, because in many ways the company ran better when people were given that level of freedom, and we combined that with a clear purpose. There's a lot of energy that is released in the organization, and you see the importance of what we're doing also to society. That triggers a lot. So it really resonated well with what André said on also trust within the companies, and it starts there, and then of course we build broader in the society. So.
So that point around the link between business performance and purpose, I think, is a really interesting one. And I want to pick up on that and ask you both something that came through in our trust barometer as well, is that obviously employers are the most trusted among the institutions at the moment. But there is also this sense, increasing expectations from both the public and from employees for companies to take on these broader social issues, be it climate change, vaccine hesitancy, racism. How do you see businesses' role in addressing these and actually the larger SDG issues?
Well,
Svein, do you want to?
I could, I could start. I think we have to realize that the role of business leaders has expanded significantly in the recent years. We're way past the Milton Friedman business of business is business, but it's stakeholder capitalism, as Professor Schwab has written very well in his book, and that means that we have a much broader scope of what we're doing, and I think the last year and a half now has really been the test and the proof of the purpose-driven companies. For our sake, providing agriculture input, if we don't get our products out to the farmers, their yields drop by 50% in the first season, and that gives a sense of purpose that we know that what we're doing is important. And I think especially so when we have people spread all over with home offices and so on, to know that you're doing something that is meaningful is really key. And then also specifically on addressing other issues, I've been very conscious to communicate directly with all our employees. I use my own personal email to send to all our 17,000 employees, and raising a lot of different topics. One about the performance of the company, but also what is happening around us, taking a position on Black Lives Matter, addressing mental health, to put in place paid sick leave, to give people a certainty of a paycheck in case some of our businesses would have to stop for a period, and so on. So really, in this last year and a half, broaden the type of communication throughout the whole organization, and the response has been massive.
So I think you make a very good point. Yeah, André, in the last 18 months, these expectations on CEOs and what to engage in. André.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kirsty, but I just want to absolutely support what Svein just said. There are these four groups in everybody's life. There, the government, business, media, as we spoke about before, and of course NGO as well, and then businesses. And businesses have a flexibility, have a capacity at being closer to their employees that all these other groups do not really have. I mean, our purpose is what makes us get up every morning. For an NGO, what's important is to satisfy, and I've been on the board of many NGOs, so I know the sector quite well. Then you have to satisfy your members, and that sort of reduces a bit of flexibility in your way of acting. Government, of course, you're on a 4-year cycle. You need to be re-elected. So the idea that we, with the help of media, can try to reach out a little bit to people around the planet and try to produce something that is predictable. Our societal duty, our duty as entrepreneurs and as companies. I think that really is a fundamental key to the way we want to reconstruct the environment around us. The fact that so many of our employees are looking for a place where they can get objective information depends on them being able to trust us. I mean, sorry, I'm opening open doors here, but and we can only be trusted if we are transparent and predictable.
Yeah, that was actually one of the other findings that came through in our barometer, is that people trusted employer communications more so than anything from government or from national media news sources. They trust the information from the employer. So you're absolutely right. There is a responsibility and an obligation that goes with that. If you consider the complexities in our global political and media landscape right now, how do you build back better? How do you actually increase trust? what specific things do people need to do to build back better and to build a greater sense of trust? Svein?
That's not easy to give an answer to that, but I do believe that transparency is key, and using technology for good to create that transparency, and then I think also standards are important. How do we measure, and that could be both for financial standards, and there's a lot of good work happening there now, so you can actually measure the businesses that are doing well, and how well they're doing, but also in absolute terms of emissions. So a lot of the technology is out there, but it's important that we try to focus around some standards, so that we don't get a confusion all over the place about that.
Yeah. André, how do you think you increase trust?
You have to be able to trust if you want to be trusted. It's a two-way relationship. So I feel that in particular in times of upheaval, as we are living at the moment, the fact that a leader is not infallible, the fact that a leader from time to time goes in the wrong direction, is something that should be acknowledged. It should be perhaps even celebrated. We consider ourselves as an innovation company. If you cannot innovate if you don't fail. It's a simple equation. So if you really want to rebuild trust, you have to appear more in touch with what the people who are working with you expect from you. But that also implies that they have to be trusted. You need to be able to, and as Svein said before, this remote working has helped us to build this sort of relationship. We should not be focusing on how we interrelate. We should be focusing on the outcome that we're generating. How can we be united in doing the right thing, taking ownership of some of the problems? So for me, transparency is key, predictability is important, and you have to be able to have the humility to say, well, we are trying very hard, we're trying our best, but it's not always good enough, and sometimes it doesn't work. And I'm very tempted to talk about AstraZeneca, this amazingly courageous decision of their CEO to say, we are going to manufacture a vaccine, although we've never done something like this before, and we're going to do it at cost because it's something that the world needs. We're going to deliver to COVAX, we're going to license out to people in India. I mean, everything there was done rightly. And yet there were a couple of problems along the way, a couple of communications issues, certain things were not provided formally, and now the whole world is united against this poor CEO who has in fact taken a very courageous decision. I have no doubt that particular wrong will be righted, but the fact that he was able to open up to his employees and to say, yeah, we blundered, we did not produce as many doses as we thought we would, and some of the language in our contracts were not exactly the way they should be. I mean, all these things, I think, is to me a sense of leadership. It's to me a demonstration of bold leadership.
So as we think about leadership going forward, and I think there are so many points that have come through as we've had this conversation around vulnerability, around transparency, connecting with employees. Can I ask you both, when you look back on the last 18 months, what has it meant for how you think about leadership, and how has it influenced how you're going to lead going forward? Svein?
It has fundamentally changed how I think about leadership after we empower the organization. Very clear. We say that we trust you. You know the business. You're on the ground. You make the right decisions. When we see the momentum that created, I actually decided just a month later to reorganize the whole company from being based functionally based to regionally based, to give our companies out there the whole toolbox. So they have a P&L and they have a balance sheet, and then we have some things in common across the company. But by reorganizing, we were able to get much more done and quicker. So through that, I've been able to. I have an organization that takes care of the day-to-day issues, so to speak, which allows me to spend much more of my time on the longer term, on the more say I can set the direction, but within that direction, the organization needs to find out how to get that done. So it's been a real learning experience, and I think hopefully we're coming out of this crisis as a stronger company than we were entering the crisis.
I think that's so important to hear you say that in terms of the building back better. And I think you're right that it's been a time of profound reflection for many people. And I think particularly for what is good leadership, be it political, business, or in any form. Andre, how is it going to influence you in terms of your thinking about leadership going forward?
Well, first of all, we in the company we were embarking in a transformation already, where we were trying to sort of be much more outward facing and not only internally focused. So not only serving the hierarchy and not only sort of identifying that the boss is the boss, but also trying to focus much more on outcome, and particularly positive outcome for the patient. That crisis, that pandemic, has accelerated processes incredibly. Factor 10. We're now much more aware of how small groups can work and can work in a deregulated fashion. The transformative journey we've started has gone much further and much quicker than we had anticipated. So for me, when we look at a project, when we look at a way of organizing our resources and management decision or asset allocation, this is a collective decision. It's something that has to happen together. We are co-creating what the company is doing, and we are in doing this recognize that the company is not owned by shareholders, i.e. not by my family, but that the company is owned by the stakeholders, by all the persons who depend on our activity on a daily basis. And that's, of course, all the supply chain, but it's also the patient. It's also the 125 million patients who took our drugs last year, not all manufactured by us, but most of them discovered by us. There is a conversation there which I would like to continue to foster. The notion is not what makes the company great. The notion is what makes the company more active to serve the community in where we are. And that's not only a question of the patient, our essential business. It's also how do we treat local communities. I mean, Svein was talking about Black Lives Matter. Why does that suddenly, in the middle of a pandemic, become such an issue? Clearly, because it is one of the pressure points into the way the society is structured. And so we need to be able to address that. As a big employer, we need to have an answer to this question. We also need to have an answer to the environmental issue, of course. Yes, we should never take a decision within the business that is only based on one factor. We need, in the future, to be able to look at the impact we're having on the natural capital, the social capital, the human capital, before we go into the produce capital, which is what we report to society. And there is something that needs to change. We do have an accounting problem collectively. At the company, we have internal metrics, but I am actively campaigning, and I hope that we will be able to see something happening there in the foreseeable future for a metric which would allow us to measure impact and not just financial return. And, people are listening. I don't know if Svein would agree with me, but, a lot of our peer group are saying, well, yes, we would. Tell us how to do it. What can we do to improve impact and to improve a positive impact on society, on nature, and on talent.
So I think, Andre, that is a fantastic way of closing out, because I think you've really issued a challenge in terms of getting people to think differently about short-term versus long-term, and this point around the need to think holistically, not just, that really is what I think we learned from 2020, that it can't all be about economic growth. I think if we learn one thing from COVID is that without health, you don't really have anything, right? You cannot have a healthy economy without a healthy population. I also want to thank both of you for sharing so many insights from the businesses you run, but also the points you have made about the learnings in terms of the importance of transparency, of values, of showing commitment and elements of humility and vulnerability, because I think those two are really key skills that have come out of 2020 and new expectations around what is the role of CEO. So I would just like to close by thanking you for your commitment to your people, your commitment to these values, and the commitment that you are showing as leaders to this holistic environment. So thank you very much for the time today. Thank you for hosting, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.